Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today once again is going to be Gordon James Gianninoto, and we're going to be talking quite a bit about Nibiru and how close its proximity is to our sun, judging by the its moons and it's in the tail of the planet itself, if I understand this correctly. And also, I think he mentioned something to me in Skype earlier, but I lost it when I called him, that he wanted to talk about that we can cover here in just a minute. But before we go too far, I want to remind everybody you can learn more about Gordon, at Zeta Talk or Zeta Rect. What was that correct website before I mess it up, Gordon?
First of all, good evening to all of you, and I'm a member of the Poleshift.ning.com, and people want to join that. That's the latest information on Poleshift and what the extraterrestrials have to say about it, and what people around the world have photographed themselves and sent in, and the latest on every part of that story. So if that interests you, and I hope that it does, because that's what we're talking about tonight, you can find me on poleshift.ning.com. It's free to join. There's about 5,300 members. There's many, many times more than that who read it every day for the latest news. And you don't have to be a member, but if you want to send me a message, you have to be a member. And they're very strict with what they don't want you asking personal questions, and they don't want you talking about things that have been mentioned before. And there have been a lot of things mentioned before, because that's where the public gets to ask questions of the Zetas. And Nancy Leader reads the questions and either accepts them or doesn't accept them. If she accepts them, it's because it's a question that's never been asked before in 17 years and 39,000 pages of questions and answers. So that means if you want to ask a question, you better go to the main site, which is zetatalk.com, and do a Google search to see if your question's already been asked and answered. But anyway, that's where you find the information.
You know, I was just adding on the tip of my tongue. I was trying to think of zetatalk.com, and for some reason I had a brain freeze. But I do appreciate you helping me out with that, Gordon. And I want to thank you for returning to my show tonight, because I know you got so much to cover, you can't really cover it in any one given particular show. Also, before we go too far into this, I'd like to remind everybody that the call-in number is 832-632-7904. For those of you listening at iTunes, Shoutcast, or somewhere else, I'd love to have you join us over here at www.paranormalpalace.com. I appreciate all my listeners everywhere, but you come over here, we can all get together in the chat room and talk while the show's going live. And I'd love to have a little community going over here. So, Gordon, what was that other topic that I had a brain freeze on that you mentioned in the instant message?
The remote viewing that
that one.
In 2010. But I just want to say, Royce, I really enjoy being on your show. I find that you're extremely well informed. You're very articulate. You keep right up with me, and I think you're doing a great public service. And the best thing of all is the way you started putting your shows on YouTube. So I'm assuming that this show is going to be on YouTube probably by tomorrow or whenever. And I think that's the greatest thing of all, because that's a way that everyone can access the subject without any problem at all, because everybody knows how to go to YouTube. And all you've got to do is look up Planet X, and you're going to be finding this interview.
Right, and you can also go to Mr. Paranormal's channel. You'll find all the interviews. But he's right, Planet X would probably be the shortest route in the YouTube search engine. And Gordon, believe me, I'm going to be posting this show and many shows yet to come, over at YouTube. I think it helps people over there know about me. It helps them know about you. And it helps them get information. So it's really kind of a win-win for everybody. Gordon, I want to appreciate you, because you do, you're a very well-spoken person, and you're very knowledgeable. You've done your research. Whether a person agrees with you or not really wouldn't be relevant. I think we talked about this last time you was on the show, nearly so much as we're dealing with material that it's sometimes hard to say who's right and who's wrong, to be sitting there using that as a point of dissension when the important thing is really getting the information out on the table.
Well, this is life-changing stuff, and you know, you can choose not to believe a word I say, and I have no, you know, I'm not selling anything, so, you know, I don't have a website, I don't have anything that's for sale, I don't charge for this information. This is just because I want people to know this information to me, and I'm a pretty well-informed person, like you say. You know, I'm pretty well educated, although that didn't seem to do much for me. The things that I consider the most important things I learned in life are things that I learned outside of school. But I am pretty well educated, and you know, and when I find something that's exciting, I mean, and there are a lot of exciting things out there, and you can, you know, they're pieces to a puzzle, and you put the pieces together, and then all of a sudden there's the picture, and you're like, oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah, and I can understand where you're coming from. I myself prefer what I learned outside of school. But you know what? This is some pretty recent news you got going on, if I'm not mistaken, about the Nibiru, Planet X, as some people call it, being near our sun. What can you tell us about that?
Well, see, going back to NASA's lies, which are so many that it's funny. They just this week announced that they don't want anybody going near the Apollo landing sites, which you might think, well, what control do they have over that? Are they kidding? I mean, are they serious? And then you realize that they're particularly worried that nobody go near Apollo 11 and Apollo 17, which, of course, that's like, you know, the story of Brer Rabbit, you know, in the briar patch. I mean, it's like, oh, don't go in there? Well, of course, that would be the first place I would look. Just take me right over to Apollo 11 and Apollo 17 and let me see why you don't want me to be there. You know, and the reason why is because they landed all the Apollo flights in the midst of extraterrestrial ruins on the moon intentionally. So that sat there for all these years, nobody knew. But now there's something like 23 different teams building robots, rovers, to go to the moon and roam around the moon. So NASA knows with 23 rovers, somebody is, and I'll tell you, if it was my rover on the moon, I'll tell you, I'd drive it right over to Apollo 11 and Apollo 17 because those are the ones they don't want me to look at. And they're going to find that they landed in the middle of alien ruins, which means since 1970, NASA has known that there are extraterrestrials. And that's 42 years of lies. So right there, it's over for NASA. So NASA's lying just about everything. And they would have you believe that they're still looking for Planet X. And they've known for 60 years that Planet X was approaching from the direction of Orion, which is the constellation where you have the Archer. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, you have the constellation the Pleiades. Then you've got Orion, and then to the lower left, you've got this star that spins around really fast and emits different colors that people always mistake for a UFO, called Sirius. So right there where the three stars in the belt are, that's where Planet X was coming in. So they sent up an infrared satellite to look for it in 1983, and they found it, and they announced it in all the national newspapers in December 1983. Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA together jointly announced they have found Planet X. And then the next day they go, whoops, we're still looking for it. No, we thought we found it, but we were wrong. We're still looking. Don't worry. You can go back to sleep. And I'm sure it was because that night people said, well, if you found it and it's coming in, what does that mean? So, of course, after they thought about it, they realized it was better for them to say, well, we didn't find it. We're still looking for it. So that was really the beginning of the lie. Then it entered our solar system and the outer reaches in 1999, and then it came around from behind the sun in the year 2003 in December, and it's been in between the sun and the earth since 2003. Now, there's 93 million miles between the earth and the sun, And if you draw a straight line from the center of the Earth to the center of the Sun, that's 93 million miles. But below that line, so as you look at the Sun, as seen from the Earth, below the Sun, but close to the Earth, only 30 million miles away, is Nibiru, or, as it's known today, Planet X. And that's where it is. And it's pointing, it's laying on its side, so its North Pole is pointed at the Earth like a flashlight, and it's got a twin-stranded tail that is got hundreds of moons, trillions of boulders and rocks, untold amounts of gravel, iron ore dust, and oily hydrocarbons. So that tail, when it was closer to the Sun and it was approaching us from next to the Sun, it looked like a bird wheeling in the sky because each strand of the tail looked like a wing. And that actually is the ancient symbol for the destroyer planet.
Yeah, the winged sun globe.
It's called the winged globe. And that's the symbol. You see that pilots have little globes with wings on them. That's like, oh, you earned your pilot's wings. You know, it's the same symbol.
Right. You know, I've read that before, too. So basically, from what you're describing, shouldn't anybody with a telescope be able to look up there and see the planet somewhere in its orbit?
No, it's not in an orbit. It's stopped, and the Earth is stopped. And the planets, if you could reach up and pull all the solar system down and slap it down on the table in front of you, it would look like a giant pancake, like a fried egg with the Sun at the center. And all the planets and the Sun all have their north poles pointing upward. And no planet can reverse its north pole without all of them reversing. And that isn't going to happen anytime soon. So what you've got is all of the planets, as seen from above, going around the Sun counterclockwise. But in comes Planet X going around the Sun clockwise. But the mystery ingredient here that people don't realize, which I mentioned on the last show, is that gravity pushes, it doesn't pull. So when Planet X came face to face with Venus and the Earth, it stopped them both in their orbits around the Sun. It stopped moving around the Sun. And then the dark twin of Earth, which was on the opposite side of the Sun from the Earth, which is another NASA lie they never told, the minute they sent a satellite up from Earth, they must have been able to look behind the Sun and go, oh my God, there's a third planet the same size as Earth. So you have three planets. The Earth and the dark twin are exactly the same size, and Venus is like 94% the size of Earth. So you've got three identical sized planets stopped in orbit around the Sun. And so it's been just gradually approaching, and the reason why it's approaching is because it wants to escape the solar system. It doesn't like being stopped by Venus, the Earth, and the dark twin of Earth. So, and the dark twin has no atmosphere, no water, no life. It's a black cinder. It's got lots of gold on it that the Anunnaki from Nibiru are still mining, but it does not reflect light very well. And if it does reflect light at all, it's usually a bluish lavender color, sometimes flashes of gold, but depending on how bright the sunlight is. And the dark twin of Earth has been photographed recently from Antarctica, from the Neumayer station, Neumayer, which is the German Antarctic station, has a webcam, and it shows the building on stilts, and it's Neumayer 3 because the first two got buried by ice. So they finally wised up and put these huge stilts in there. So Neumayer 3 is on stilts. They have a radar dome away from the building, and they've got a webcam on it, and you can watch the sun rise and go by the station and then set. And then you can watch the moon rise and then set. And on April 9th, there were three things. First, the sun rose and set. Then the dark twin of Earth rose and set. Then the moon rose and set. And that was a spectacular capture of the dark twin of Earth. So these are things that, if you're not paying attention, you think, and probably deep in your heart, you wish things would continue. You don't want an apocalypse. You're thinking to yourself, well, you know, in a few years I'll be able to retire, my 401k will be fine, and I'll be able to buy that sailboat, or, you know, whatever your dream is. You and your wife are going to travel around the world, or who knows what your dreams are, but the thing is, somewhere you'd like things to continue. So saying that there's about to be an apocalypse that's happened every 3,657 years for at least 2 billion years, so this is so definitely not the first time, that, and therefore it's natural. And we've lived and died through this before. Some of us dying and some of us living through it. So, but NASA has known this for 60 years. So how criminal is that? Forget extraterrestrial ruins on the moon. How about knowing about the Earth is going to go through a cataclysm in 2012 or 2013 and not saying a word about it? Well, meanwhile, the elite prepare in all the ways they think are going to work, which actually, I'm here to tell you, none of them are going to work. If they want to survive, they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and work in the garden just like you and me. Because there's not going to be any food delivery. Certainly you're not going to be able to spend any money or any gold or diamonds or jewels or any other valuables on anything. You're going to have to produce something to trade, and somebody with some food or something that you want is going to have to be producing that and make a deal with you to trade for it. So this is going to be a barter economy very soon.
Yeah, I know some people tried to bring back bartering a few years ago when I was working, but one of the things that caught my attention that you were saying was about 3 planets stopped orbiting. How does a planet stop orbiting, and what effect does that have on the planets around it, and doesn't it put it in the path of a planet that's still orbiting?
No. See, that's what's so interesting about, I mentioned this before, that I figured this out logically on my own without a $5 million laboratory, without top scientists working for me, and it just made absolute sense. And that is, you have the electromagnetic spectrum. You've got heat, sound, light, electricity, radio waves, and they all go out and don't come back. You can reflect them back, but they go out and they don't come back. Then you've got magnetism, which some people say is bipolar, and because it goes out the North Pole and then the lines of magnetic force get sucked back in the South Pole. But really, the only engine in that is at the North Pole where the magnetic field gets shot out. So I'm going to put that in the category of it goes out and it doesn't come back. So you don't have people talking anti-sound, anti-heat. You don't hear people talking about anti-light, anti-radio, but you do hear about anti-magnetic. So, and by that they're referring to something that's not iron, therefore magnetism doesn't work on it. But you know, we've seen experiments where they've created these incredible fields, and they floated a frog, which certainly was a living frog. It wasn't an iron frog; it was a living frog. They floated it in the air above this huge magnetic field. So it's really a question of how much magnetic field you have as to whether something is magnetic or not. But they say anti-magnetic, they mean like aluminum. But that isn't really the same as saying that there's, you know, as anti-light, and then you say anti-magnetic. They're not really talking about the same anti-thing. So then you get down to the end of the spectrum, and all of a sudden you're down at the other end of the electromagnetic spectrum. You have gravity, and we've been told before we were born, for the last 400, 500 years, we have been told that gravity pulls. But I called the foremost gravity researcher in the world in 1989, and I had a 4-hour conversation with Dr. Ephraim Fishbach at Purdue University. And I asked him flat out, is there any proof that gravity pulls? Because I'm convinced it pushes. And he goes, you may very well be right. There is not a single experiment in the history of the world that proves whether gravity pushes or pulls. He goes, if you would invent an experiment that proves one way or the other, you would probably be one of the most famous scientists in the last 1,000 years and maybe forever. So,
well, you know, Gordon, if you're correct, and I have reason to believe you are, well, at least it would make sense to me about gravity pushing.
Yes.
Just think about how much easier it would be for people to displace gravity waves with, say, something like sound or magnetic waves and make things like the boulders on the Giza pyramid weigh almost nothing and easy to put into place.
Exactly. You see, that's another thing that's always bothered me is about science fiction, because a lot of it, they talk about anti-gravity, and like I'm thinking, well, where's the anti-light? Where's the anti-radio waves? Where's the anti-heat? Where's the sound? So, that, you can look at some of these things as if they're a wave or a particle, and if you look at them as a wave, you can cancel the wave by creating other waves. So, that's a whole subject in physics that I'm not going to get into, but the point is that it just didn't seem logical to me, having seen over 36 saucers up close, including a mothership a mile in diameter, floating silently above me. It did not make sense to me that there was such a thing as anti-gravity. It seemed logical that they have on these ships something that creates gravity. They turn it on, it pushes downward, gravity waves go downward, and it pushes off the Earth. And they can set it so that it hovers, or they can set it so that they just zoom out of here, or they can set it so that they land gently. And I was trying that, and that's where my interest came from, was from seeing so many extraterrestrial ships materialize or zoom in. I've seen it all. I've seen cylinders, triangles, needles, spheres, fuzzy spheres, top hats, discs with pontoons, top half of grapefruits flat on the bottom and hemispherical on the top. So I've seen a lot of different things, and I was thinking, how in the hell are they doing that? And I thought, well, I should be able to, using logic, figure out what is going on here, because the more I read, the more confused I got, and it just didn't make sense. So this is something I figured out on my own. You don't have to believe me. I know some of you are going to think, well, if they don't come from Harvard to tell me that's true, then I'm not going to believe it. Well, good for you. But I'm telling you that the secret of what's going on in the solar system is that these planets are not colliding. And why are they not colliding? Because they all have gravity. And what does the gravity do? It pushes. So planets colliding is not a big problem anyway. And then when you get Planet X coming in, of course it's going to push. It's 4 times the size of Earth, and it's pushing against 3 planets that are trying to go counterclockwise. And don't forget, all the planets move in what's called the ecliptic, which is the orbital plane. I said if you reached up and took the solar system and laid it on a tabletop, it would all be flat like a pancake. So that's because of particle flows from the sun. So the sun is the controlling mechanism. It sends out all these particle flows, and it organizes all the planets into this pancake, including when Planet X comes into the solar system, it goes into the pancake too. So what you have is one 29,000-mile planet trying to go clockwise, and you have 3 7,500-mile diameter planets trying to go counterclockwise. So they all stop, and they're doing a dance. And if you've ever cornered a dog, let's say you have your garage is attached to your house and makes a corner on the outside of your house, and the dog is in the corner, and you want to catch it and put the leash on, and the dog darts to the left, you dart to the left, and the dog darts to the right, you dart to the right. So some people call this dance of the planets a dance, but you could look at it as very, very similar to trying to catch your pet to put a leash on him. So what you have is a dance. The Nibiru is trying to get by, and the Earth and Venus and the Dark Twin are trying to get by, and they're all stopped. And that's since 2003, regardless of what anybody says about it. Now, I was a trained astrologer, and you used to be able, well, you still can, you look up the position of the planets in the ephemeris. And when I realized that this is what's going on, I said, this is ridiculous to try and do an astrological chart, because actually you don't know where these planets are. The outer planets are so far away from the Earth that even if we're not moving around the sun, they still pretty much look like they are where they should be.
And none of the astronomers, be they amateur or professional, can see this with their telescopes?
No, because what are you going to see? You look up and you find now, you see, they have a lot of these telescopes now that have, you find the North Star, and then it locates everything else. So it wouldn't matter whether you were going or stopped. You know, people go out and they spend $300 for a telescope, and they find the North Star, and then all of a sudden it finds everything else for you. So, you know, and the thing is that a lot of amateur astronomers, that's what they're doing. They're the few who are real professionals, who are in charge of laboratory, astronomical observatories around the world, you know, big ones and mountaintops in Hawaii and Chile and other places. Those people have no chance of speaking up, because clearly anyone that speaks up ends up dead. So if the government wants everyone to be quiet, and they have a lot of different ways. If you've read the book Forbidden Archaeology with Michael Cremo, you see that whenever something is found that doesn't fit into the quote-unquote accepted science, and you publish it, that's it for you. You don't get tenure, you don't get any more grants, you don't have any more offers to publish your articles, and pretty soon your career is over. So all these people have basically made a choice that possessions are more important than people, more important than the truth, and they're towing the line, and that's why it's quiet. It's just, listen, there was a solar eclipse in 2011 where the moon was the same size as the sun, so it completely blocked the sun, and at that exact moment, Planet X became visible next to the sun, as seen from the Earth. Now remember, I said it's 93 million miles to the sun, but Planet X is only 30 million miles from us. But it's below that line. It's just on the bottom of the pancake. It's like a chocolate chip that's settled to the bottom of the pancake. So, at the exact moment that it became visible on all these webcams worldwide, all of them were turned off. Now, how did that happen? How did webcams from the Pacific to, I mean, you name it, they all went off at the same time, and it's NASA. NASA ordered them to turn them off, and they said if you see Planet X on there and you leave it on one more second, no more funding for you. And the government is basically buying silence. All these things that you think are, you know, real scientists searching for the truth. No, they have jobs, and they're paid, and their paychecks are going to stop, or worse, if they don't do what they're told. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who don't like to bring information forward for fear of alienation, loss of paycheck, or employment, etc., on various different subjects. And pardon the frog in my throat there. So now, how much longer are you guesstimating before Planet X is through making its pass?
Well, that's the question. You see, everybody wants to know, and particularly the elite want to know. Now, the original plan under George Bush, because he was in office when Nancy Lieder said it came around the face of the sun, and Poleshift could happen at any time, quote unquote, at any time. And the reason why nobody knows for sure is because there's all this darting going on. Planet X wants to go over here, and the Earth is blocking it. Then it wants to go over there, and Venus is blocking it. So this has been going on for 9 years. So, you know, you have to say, well, what would be the date? And if I have one question that I'm asked more frequently than any other, and I say the same thing to everybody, I don't know. I don't know how to know. I don't know who knows, and I don't know where to go. And as far as I can tell, nobody knows. And the Rothschilds are the most interested in the military-industrial complex. Now, under Bush, they had outfitted all these airplanes with spray systems, and they were thinking, well, once it becomes clear that Poleshift is about to happen, there's going to be total chaos. And after that, there's not going to be enough food for everybody, and it's going to be impossible to impose government restrictions in any way at all, and there's only going to be limited areas of martial law. The easiest thing for us to do would be to spray everybody with chemical and biological warfare, toxins and agents, and kill everybody. And as hard as that is to believe, that was, in my opinion, the number one reason to get Bush and Cheney out of the White House, because the people behind them, that was their plan. Now we've got somebody in the White House who I'd rather not comment on, but I'm not very happy with. But at least he's not going to spray everybody. So, but these are the source of all these new executive orders and laws giving powers to FEMA and creating internment camps and emergency centers. And all these things are all related to this. This is why that's happening. And I mean, even when you go to the drugstore, let's say your doctor prescribes something, you go to the drugstore and they say, well, we're out of that. Why are they out of it? Because the rich people are buying 40 years worth of it. They have an in with the doctors. They get paid extra, and they're putting aside. They're thinking, well, the world is going to come back, or I'm only going to live another 40 years. In any case, this is the medication I need. I'm going to put it aside. Now, there aren't any drug shortages because the factories aren't making the drugs. There aren't any drug shortages because there's shortages of the ingredients or the materials. There's shortages because gigantic amounts of drugs are being socked away in caves and bunkers for the rich people, but not for you and me. So, and personally, I don't even like doctors, and the whole pharmaceutical system, I think, is a ripoff with the insurance industry, and I'm a believer in colloidal silver. And also, I think, if you want to be healthy, the first requirement is that you be happy. So you should really be happy with who you are, who you live with, what you're doing, and where you are. And if you're that happy, then you're going to be a lot healthier, because every time I talk to somebody who's sick, eventually I get to something that they're really unhappy about. And to me, and I'm going to be 64 in October, all the illness that I've seen all gets back to the fact that the people who are ill are very unhappy about something. It may take a while for them to reveal it, but the people who have serious illnesses all have some major unresolved problems. But anyway, getting back to the subject, so there's a lot of behind-the-scenes preparation going on for this, and everybody wants to know when it's going to be. Well, I just got the first major clue this last week, and I sent it out as an email, and you have that conspiracy UFO website, and I posted it on your website. But
well, that's actually a Nixer's group, but I moderate it for.
Well, you do a wonderful job.
Well, she's recently had a grandbaby, and she hadn't been around. She wanted to take a break from the internet and from paranormal and just attend all her time to her new grandkids. So I'm just filling in for her while she's gone.
Well, that's I sent it out as an email and I posted it there, and this is what I discovered. Now, everybody's probably heard of remote viewing. Now, you may or may not have heard of the idea, the concept of the Akashic record, but it's an idea that you've probably perhaps even discussed with somebody at some point in your life.
Oh yeah, I've had a guy, one of the guys with our community on my website, and we talk on my show, and we talked about it.
Yeah, and so the idea is that everything that ever happened, everything that is happening, and everything that ever will happen, even including free will, is all recorded somewhere by some mechanism. And most of the psychics and mediums, those kind of people, put a label to it called the Akashic record. And so they could go to the Akashic record and they can read all of your previous lifetimes. They can read your probable future set up on, based on what you've done so far. And so it's a very interesting concept that somebody could do that. But in the 1970s, the Soviet Union started using psychics as part of their Cold War weapons. And the United States got really scared. Oh my God, what is the Soviet Union discovering with all these psychics? So they went to some top psychics like Ingo Swann, and they said, well, we've got to come up with a way that we can use psychics to learn things. And Ingo and some other people came up with this idea of remote viewing. And the idea is that you can sit quietly and tune in on any place at any time. Now, for a lot of people, this is like really big news. Just the thought that you could even do that has probably never crossed their mind. But what they wanted to do was take people who weren't psychics, because psychics are few and far between, and they all have their own individual situations that make them more or less desirable for the military. So what they wanted to do was take anybody and train them to be a remote viewer. So they came up with what they call remote viewing protocols, and they have training sessions, and then people call themselves TRV, a trained remote viewer. So there actually are, and I undoubtedly, in your audience tonight, there are trained remote viewers. I know that on my email list, there are several people who are trained remote viewers.
Oh, yeah. There's Lynn Buchanan, who's been on my show. He was actually trained by the military for it.
Right, and I have people on my list who were trained by Lynn Buchanan.
I mean, you see what I'm talking about. It's definitely a real phenomenon.
Right. Now, I have never been trained for it, but I am an old soul, and I am naturally psychic. And recently we had a remote viewing experiment with a friend. And she said, I have a dining room, and at one end of the dining room there's a counter on the wall, which I call the bar, which is where they mix drinks, I guess. And she said, I'm going to clear the bar, and I'm going to put 3 objects there, and I want you and Janet to tell me what those 3 objects are. So we've never been trained as remote viewers. We know nothing about it. But I said, Janet, let's get some index cards and sit down and just try and do some sketches of each of the shapes of each of the objects. And then let's discuss it and see what we think. And it's important, and this is so hard for people to do, but I know everybody has heard this, that you should always trust your first instinct.
That's what they taught us in the Marine Corps, too, by the way.
Yeah, and I mean, that's easy to say because you get an idea, it's a watermelon, and then your mind says, no, it couldn't be a watermelon, it's probably a football, and then you think, no, it couldn't be a football, maybe it's a leather glove, then you think, no, maybe it isn't a leather glove, maybe it's a pair of shoes that have laces on them, and then and you just go on and on and on, and all these ideas are in your head, and you can't decide what the hell it is you're trying to figure out. But if you, as a remote viewer, you just let your hand lightly rest on the paper, you take a pencil or a pen, and you just start drawing shapes, and you let things come to your mind, and you do these 3 objects one at a time. So Janet and I did that, and then I said, why don't I try, because she is a psychic, and I'm not a trained hypnotic expert at all, but I've been to sessions where people have put other people into deep trances where they can uncover hidden things in their consciousness. And I said, let me lie down on the couch, and I will take you through the ceiling of our house, and I will bring you down through the ceiling of this woman's house in New Mexico, and you'll come through the ceiling, and you'll be in the dining room, and you'll look over at the bar, and you'll tell me what you see. And she said, oh, I see a bowl of walnuts. So we each had our various interpretations of what we saw, but they were so close that one was a cut crystal bowl, one was a vase with flowers, and one was some little tool. And it turned out that she had put a knife, a vase of flowers, and a cut glass bowl on this bar. So she considered that we got 100%. And she said, but what was really funny was that for the year before she cleared the bar to put the objects on it, she had kept in the dining room a bowl of walnuts. So Janet had seen what used to be there. It must have just still been registering in the room that it was a bowl of walnuts. So I don't care how you do it. You can go to school and learn to be a remote viewer. But the idea is that you can not only go to what's there now, but you could go and look at what's on the bar on June 1st, 2013, for instance. So you see, what we're talking about is that in this world where we have 3-dimensional objects, length, width, and height, and they move around and they create time, and time is the 4th dimension. So you could say Some people call this a third dimension that we're in. Other people count in time and say that we're in the fourth dimension. And physicists have said, well, what if each dimension had 3 dimensions and then there was time? So there's a lot of people that are experts in so-called string theory. And this is where physics just fell off the table as far as I'm concerned, because I think there's unlimited dimensions. And I think trying to quantify it that way and say, well, there's 10 dimensions. Each dimension, like length, width, and height, itself has 3 dimensions. And at that point, they lose me. But
they're making statements about things they have not yet verified and have not figured out how to confirm it yet anyway.
Exactly. So, people, you could say, well, let's say wherever you live, there's a vacant lot across the street. You could do a remote viewing of someday what will be there on that lot. And there's no way to verify that. I mean, it isn't built yet. Maybe it hasn't been sold. Maybe, a lot of reasons why. But the point is, if you wish to do it, you can do it. Now, you could do something like, what's going to be, like somebody could send you a package and it's going to arrive on your doorstep next Wednesday. You could say, what's in the box that's going to arrive next Wednesday? And then next Wednesday when it shows up, you open the box and then you're either right or you're wrong, So there are ways to do this. But there are only very few remote viewers in the world who are the best of the best. And they're the ones who were trained by the military day in and day out. They were able to enter top secret government facilities of our enemies and see who was in the room, what instruments they had, what devices they had, what they were doing with them. And when this became public in the Pentagon, they said, well, they were disbanding it and they weren't going to do it anymore. And I say, if you believe that, then, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you.
And I got some oceanfront property in Arizona.
Exactly. So, you know that if it worked, that they're doing it, all they did was make it more secret than it was. So one of these top remote viewers is Dr. Courtney Brown. And he's a sociology professor at Emory University. So he's not out there like another famous one, Ed Dames, who's got a group and they hire themselves out to whoever wants to pay for them. And they charge a hell of a lot of money. And I have absolutely no respect for Ed Dames. He's always harping on we're going to have a giant solar flare and that's going to destroy the earth. And to me, he's a paid government disinformation specialist. And I would not be surprised to find out that he gets a check every week from the government to spout this stuff about solar flares, because that's the number one lie that NASA has been putting forward. And of course, it becomes less and less useful. So now it just gets ridiculous. Like, when you catch a fish and you land it in the boat and it flops around and it's trying to get a grip on anything.
Right.
And that's sort of what NASA's doing. They recently announced that the sun is going to have 2 north poles and 2 south poles. Like, that's going to explain everything. So it's just ridiculous. And to me, Ed Dames is part of that ridiculousness. But Courtney Brown he examines whatever he wants to examine if it interests him. And he has a team of top remote viewers, including the one who was on your show. So he has a book out that's the only one of his books that I actually own, where he remote viewed extraterrestrials on the moon and Mars. And he went into their bases, into the laboratories, and he saw what they were doing. And what was interesting is while he was doing that, they saw him in their space. And some of them didn't like it. So it's all in this book. I forget what the title of it is, but it's quite interesting. I'm sure you can find it. So
I've read of a similar experience that somebody, I forget where I saw it, it was somewhere online, claims to have had a remote viewing session where they went into the Dulce underground base and they were spotted by aliens and had to get out of there.
Right, that's exactly what I'm talking about, because you're out of body and you're sort of like you're not in the physical realm anymore. You're sort of beyond time and beyond space. And that's where these aliens are. They're the next dimension up, which I normally call the fourth dimension. Other people might call it the fifth. But anyway, the next level up, the next frequency up is where they are. And so when you're out of body, you're on that dimension. You're not limited by your physical limits. So, of course they can see you, and if they're unfriendly or unselfish, they're not very happy about it either.
Now, wouldn't that still be that some extraterrestrials are from other planets in this dimension and others are from other dimensions?
Exactly. There are some from this other planets on this dimension, but very few of them. But the majority of the ones that are here, and they're here because Poleshift is about to happen. And this is the last Poleshift. This is like a graduation. The Earth has said, I've had all this friggin' around. I want to move on. So the Earth is about to become, if you call this a third-dimensional planet, it's about to become a fourth-dimensional planet. And that's the most commonly accepted terminology, that we're third-dimensional now and we're about to graduate to fourth dimension. This will take place 100 years after Poleshift. So this is the last Poleshift. It's been going on for billions of years. And so when the next time Planet X comes through the solar system, the Earth is not going to be here. We're going to be almost like a ghost. They're going to look around and go, oh my God, where in the hell did the Earth go? Because they, being selfish, are still going to be on the third dimension, whereas the Earth is going to graduate. And this is the meaning in the Old Testament of the meek will inherit the earth. It's an odd way of putting it, but, you know, it's the unselfish, not the stupid. So it's going to be the very intelligent, and there's going to be open contact with extraterrestrials. So that's why there's so many ETs here now that are slanting this whole thing for success. So this is not just a physical disaster, but it's actually a spiritual choice point. It's a chance for you to prove that you personally, you Royce and you the listeners, can actually make the right choices in the toughest of circumstances. And what could be tougher with everybody around you dying than what's about to happen? So,
yeah, and I hear there's going to be a lot of people that's going to freak out during this incident while others are going to remain calm.
Well, that's the thing is there's a certain number of people, probably 60% of the world's population are going to die, mostly because they live in coastal cities and there's going to be 600-foot tidal waves worldwide. But then the people who survive, they're going to be divided into three groups. The ones that are okay and continue to survive, the ones that are in shock and just can't function at all, and those who die of disease and or starvation.
Yeah.
So, okay, Dr. Courtney Brown has done a lot of experiments. You can go to his website. It's called farsightinstitute.org. And then there's lots of headings across the top of the page, and one of them is public experiments. And then you go to that, and then there's a lot of public experiments. This is where his team remote viewed various things, not only presently, but in the past and also in the future. And then you look at the one on global warming. That's the one you want. That's the one that I discovered this week. That's the one that blew my mind. Okay. And what he did was he said, you know, global warming's such a big story in all the news. Like, half the world is absolutely concerned about it every day. And the other half thinks it's all a scam, which, of course, is what it is. You can tell which side I'm on.
Well, I kind of had my doubts about it. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can tell that, for example, when I was a kid 40 years ago, in the winter, it would ice up all day long. You come home from school, you put blankets out on the line, they would be frozen into ice. And nowadays, you hardly ever see or freeze except for at nighttime. But that doesn't mean we have global warming.
Right.
My study indicates that these are warming cycles and cooling cycles the Earth goes through periodically as it's making its path around the sun.
Well, there are lots of reasons why different things would happen, but the major point of global warming is that carbon dioxide is heating the atmosphere, and therefore it's going to cause the oceans to rise, the storms to become worse, it's going to change the climate, and we're all going to be suffering. Okay. Now, what's wrong with that idea is that the data shows in the last 10 years the air hasn't warmed at all. So, and that also there's a lot of evidence that the most of the data was fudged. And that's being polite, fudged. So, but there is warming going on, but it has nothing to do with the air whatsoever. What's happening is Planet X has a magnetic field 23 times the size of the Earth. And its north pole is pointed at the Earth like a flashlight. And what it's doing is it's causing all the iron-rich magma in the core to roil, to boil, to move around. And what that's doing is causing it to get warmer than it was. And more of the heat from the core is being transmitted through the crust to the ocean bottoms and to the ground. So what you actually have is you do have global warming, but it's not of the air, has nothing to do with the air. What it has to do with is the sea bottoms and the bottoms of glaciers. So if you look at the statistics, you see that the Himalayas and the Antarctic mountains are still gaining vast amounts of snowpack because the air is not warmer. But on the bottoms of the glaciers, there's melting. And on the seafloor, the water is getting warmer, and warm water takes up more room. So, and once again, if you have warmer water, you have more violent storms. So there is a warming, but it's not the global warming. And of course, Al Gore volunteered to be the point man, in return for which he has made tens of millions of dollars with the carbon credits. And it's a scam. The whole thing is a scam. If you look back historically, you'll see that 1,000 years ago, I like to say when there were no people and no industry, but of course there were people and there was a little bit of industry, but not much, not compared to today. There was actually many, many times more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there is today. And if you look into the carbon dioxide, you see that once the carbon dioxide increases, the global warming doesn't occur for about 300 to 500 years. So there's this huge lag between the increase in carbon dioxide. Now, with Poleshift, we're going to have every volcano on Earth go off. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, how much CO2 is in the air from industry is going to become moot pretty fast when all the earthquakes stop all the industry and the air is full of CO2 from volcanoes. So, you know, it's like, yes, there is something you should worry about, but no, you can't do anything about it. You could penalize every industry on Earth right now, and you're not going to change the fact that when Planet X gets to about 14 million miles from the Earth, we're going to have earthquakes that are in the 9 and 10 range. So nothing's going to survive. I mean, how many buildings around the world, other than tents, are going to survive a 9 or a 10 earthquake? In fact, the Richter scale was never designed to be meaningful in any sense of the word above 7 or 8, because every time you multiply the force of the vibration by another 10 times, it just gets to the point where 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, and who can imagine an earthquake that's 1,000,000 times more damaging than another one that was damaging by itself?
Well, yeah, if you think about the Chile earthquake, that one there, I believe, measured at a 8 point on the Richter scale, and it actually moved a continent.
Exactly. So, and that's another thing the Earth is trying to do. It's trying to narrow the Pacific and widen the Atlantic. There's a rift right down the center of the Atlantic called the Great Atlantic Rift, and magma wells up at the top of these ridges close to the surface of the ocean, and it amounts to a giant iron bar which goes from Iceland to Antarctica. And that is in the process of spreading the shores of the Atlantic further from each other at the same time that the shores of the Pacific is trying to move closer to each other. So under the Pacific, you have sliding and folding. You've got both of them. And what's happening is in Indonesia and Malaysia and the Philippines, you've got folding. And under Hawaii, you've got sliding. So Hawaii is actually still going to be above the waves after Poleshift.
And it's a coastal city, too, or actually a coastal state or country would be more like it.
The whole country is a series of islands, so, you know, you would think, well, if there's going to be a 600-foot tidal wave and the Pacific is going to narrow, it's likely Hawaii's going to go under. But actually, Hawaii's on a very stable base, which is like a drawer, and the drawer is going to slam shut underneath it, but let it stay where it was. So there's very interesting geology to all of this stuff with Poleshift. So all these things are related. You know, you can't just look at one part of it without looking at the other part of it. So getting back to when Poleshift is going to happen, this is why looking at this experiment, which I just happened to come across. And when I come across something that interests me, then I try and research it farther. And then I actually heard several videos, and they're on one of them's on YouTube, so you can watch it on YouTube. Dr. Courtney Brown explaining his little experiment from 2010. And this is the experiment, and this is why it's so key, because this would be the first real evidence of when Poleshift is going to occur. And that experiment was, he said, global warming is a big topic. Why don't I get 10 of the top 20 remote viewers in the world and have them remote view 9 geographic locations on 2 dates, June 1st, 2008 and June 1st, 2013. So he chose these locations. They weren't the locations I would choose. But you've got to remember, this man knows nothing of Planet X. He knows nothing of Poleshift. He knows nothing of extraterrestrials working together to save as many people as possible by warning them. He knows nothing of that. He and his team decided to study global warming. It seemed like a valid topic because between 2008 and 2013, there's 5 years. So he wanted to know if there were any differences at these 9 locations, most of which were coastal, if not, I think actually all of them were coastal locations. And part of 2 different places in Africa, Key West, the Kennedy Space Center, Honolulu, Hawaii, and Washington, D.C., and Sydney, Australia. So you can look this up. It's on the farsight.institute.org, public experiments, and then you go to the global warming experiment. So these remote viewers looked at June 1st, 2008. And, of course, he did this in 2010. So you would think, well, how stupid is that? You already know what the answer is. But the thing is remote viewing can be, and in his case, is very, very technical. And they use double-blind studies, and the people don't even know what they're looking at exactly. They're just told, tell me what you see. And so they didn't know that they were looking at something at these 9 locations from June 1st, 2008. So the fact that there wasn't much change between now and then shouldn't surprise anybody. So that's sort of like the baseline, okay? But the findings of what they saw for June 1st, 2013 are mind-boggling, and you've got to read it yourself. Now remember, he did not do this study to find out the date of Poleshift. He did it because he wanted to see if there was anything going on with global warming. He thought, well, maybe the waves will be breaking over the gantry cranes at the Kennedy Space Center, or, you know, whatever you might think global warming would do in 5 years. Instead, all 10 of the remote viewers saw the same thing. All the coastal cities of the world were totally destroyed. A gigantic tidal surge or tidal wave, because he didn't see it, had already come in and destroyed all the coastlines of the world. And the debris was piled up immensely. Most buildings were destroyed, and particularly Washington, D.C., destroyed. Only a few buildings were standing, and one of them was the Capitol building, and it had huge holes in the dome from rocks. And the Opera Center in Sydney, Australia was about the only thing that was left. And you've seen this famous building. It's described as the clamshell Opera House, the Clamshell Theatre. It's a huge civic center on the shores of Sydney, Australia, and it looks like a series of standing vertical clamshells. And that was still there because it's so massive and it's concrete. But it, too, was full of holes, as if somebody with a shotgun in the sky just fired holes through everything. Every single building was destroyed, first of all, by a tidal wave that in many of the 9 locations had gone inland at least 100 miles. And all of the buildings were empty, black, no heat, no people. They didn't see bodies, so therefore the bodies had already rotted. And they didn't see any people in these cities or these coastal areas. But what they did see was stragglers with nothing. And I mean nothing. No equipment, no backpacks, no clothing, no tools, generally solitary, walking on foot, heading inland as best they could with the hopes that they would form survival communities somewhere. There was no fuel, no transportation, no airplanes, boats, or planes, or cars, no trucks, no government. Now, think about that. I've been saying that at Poleshift, all governments will fail, all religions will fail, and all economies will fail. And this is an exact, and he's not connected to me. He's not looking for what I've been saying is going to happen. This man with his team saw that on June 1st, 2013, well, you know, today's June 5th, Royce. This was a year ago, 4 days ago. So we have 4 days less than a year till this scenario is worldwide. So this is no joke. You can say, and I know that you're not necessarily a skeptic at all, but the average person can say, well, you know, I have plenty of time. They'll announce it. You know, we'll hear, we'll know. But just think of the magnitude of this and what your preparation is for the moment. And basically, most people would have to answer their preparation is absolutely nothing.
So how far inland would you say a person would need to be to escape the flooding, the tidal waves?
Well, the Zetas have said through Nancy Leader in response to questions that they need to be at least 100 miles inland, at least 200 feet in elevation. But the more inland and the more elevation, the better. But you've got to realize the tail, the twin-stranded tail of Planet X is 5 million miles long. So the Poleshift itself is only going to take an hour. And the oceans are going to slosh for probably a day. But there's going to be a rain of rocks from the tail of Planet X because as Planet X leaves the solar system, the tail is going to brush the Earth with several things. Oily hydrocarbons, iron ore dust, and rocks. Now, the reason why those things are in the tail is because Planet X is an atmospheric, oceanic, volcanic, inhabited planet with selfish humans. So that's their planet. It is largely oceanic, and you can imagine how big oceans would be on a planet that's 29,000 miles in diameter. So it also has huge volcanic rifts that spew lava. There are constant eruptions. Now, this planet is cloudy all the time. They hardly ever get a clear sky where they can see the sun or they can see the Earth or they can see our moon or they can see anything. They can't even see most of the time their own moons. And there are hundreds of them.
Which leads you to another question. If you know there's other planets and you can get to them, why not desert the planet?
Well, that's another thing. You can't... We were discussing that before the show, you and I, that whether or not you can just move yourself from planet to planet to planet, but all evidence, as far as I know, is that you can't. Your body adjusts to whatever planet you're on, and you can't just relocate to another planet and then move on. Wherever you go, then you're stuck there, because your body can just adjust so much, and then that's that. So, and also, they're not wanted, and the unselfish extraterrestrials have been screwing with all their plans. So when they launch a rocket towards Earth going, well, we're going to come back and be the gods again, and we're going to sacrifice people and scare the hell out of them until they start mining gold for us again, which they powderize the gold and they use it in their atmosphere because for thousands of years they're in between stars, so they would cool off. With all that water, they don't cool off that much, but still they would become cool. So they've discovered if they put powdered gold in their atmosphere, it acts as an insulating curtain and it keeps them warm. But the point is, the planet's cloudy. It has these huge volcanic rifts. So the color of the volcanic rifts, and you've seen pictures of volcanoes at night, like in Hawaii, and how bright orange they are. That colors the clouds. So that's why a lot of people say, well, this is the star. Planet X is a star. It's not a star. It's an inhabited planet, but it's cloudy like Venus, and it's got gigantic volcanic rifts that create an orange-red glow. So when we finally do see it as large as the full moon, it is going to look like a dwarf star. But I assure you, it is not a dwarf star. But during these eruptions, the things that are inside of Planet X, of Nibiru, gets spewed out into the tail behind it, and that is huge amounts of red dust from the iron ore from the volcanic eruptions, and also a huge amount of petroleum. Now, this is interesting because people have wondered, where does the red soil on Earth come from, and where does the petroleum come from? A lot of people have said, well, we study the oil and we see these fossils in the oil, which means that it was formed during the age of the dinosaurs, therefore it's prehistoric, and that's where it comes from. Other scientists say, that's ridiculous, the oil is coming up through the fossils, so of course it has fossils in it, but it has nothing to do with the fossils. The Earth regularly makes oil on its own, therefore every well in the world that's been drained refills itself. So how is that happening? But the truth is neither of those. The oil comes from the atmosphere as the tail of Planet X, 5 million miles of it, brushes the Earth. So this may be hard to imagine, but if this happens every 3,657 years, you would say, how much red dust and how much oil can we get? But the thing is if this has been going on for the whole history of Earth, possibly 2 to 4 billion years, then a hell of a lot of oil could seep through the surface down into these caverns and fill them and be there to be used as reservoirs for what we call fossil fuel. So there are a lot of things that modern science thinks it's got completely figured out that it doesn't have figured out. Now, the interesting thing about the oceans and CO2 is that a lot of scientists have said, well, plankton loves CO2. And if you could feed plankton iron ore dust, then the plankton would bloom like crazy, the CO2 would be stripped out of the atmosphere, and then the air would be pure, it wouldn't be polluted with CO2, and the food chain in the ocean would skyrocket. So that's what's about to happen, because when all this iron ore dust hits the Earth is 3/4 water. It's going to turn all the oceans the funniest pea green color you've ever seen. And that iron ore dust hitting the water is food for plankton. The plankton is going to feast on it, which is going to help the CO2 situation from the volcanoes. And it's going to be the basis for the food chain. So the first place on Earth to come back food-wise is going to be the oceans and seafood, fish. So
that's interesting. Might be why it was always fish in the first place whenever there was a cataclysm.
Then there'd be huge amounts of life in the oceans. They said the Indians used to be able to walk on the backs of the salmon across the streams and rivers in New England, and you could see that could be possible again, because if you eliminate all the commercial fishing fleets, then the waters should be just packed with fish, and that's why I live on a mountaintop on the coast of Maine, is because I'm counting on that. This is the place where the lobsters come from, and the crabs, and the flounder, and bluefish, and bluefin tuna, and mussels and clams, and I mean, there's a lot going on out there. But, except for the lobsters, it's almost all fished out. And the reason why there's more lobsters is because the sea urchins used to eat the kelp. But when the sea urchins were sold to Japan, the kelp grew back, so now the baby lobsters have more places to hide, so therefore more of them survive, so therefore no matter how many lobsters they catch, there's still even more out there than ever before. So that's a lesson in commercial fishing. And just thank God you're not part of the National Oceanic Agency, that the National Fisheries, that has to decide how much catch to let the fishermen catch each year, because they can't agree on anything.
Well, I'll tell you what, going back to what you were saying earlier about gravity pushing and planets being stopped, you've got to stop and think about Nibiru's passing and all the damage that it's caused before. If gravity was pushing, though, it might allow the moons and rocks and stuff behind it and the tail to hit, but wouldn't the actual gravity that pushes from each planet keep the planets from hitting each other?
Well, that's the point. You don't hear these giant meetings. Like, when was the last time you heard of an astronomers meeting? We've got to do something about this terrible problem of stars coming out of the sky, entering the whole solar system, and colliding with planets. And I don't know about you, Royce, but I've never even heard that discussed as a problem.
I haven't either. But
yeah,
the whole point is what I was saying makes good sense.
Yeah, and so why, if you really study it, and there are some people out there, I'm sure that there'll be some listeners who are interested in this. If you really study it, the moon shouldn't even be in orbit around the Earth. I mean, it just shouldn't. There's just no explanation for it.
Well, and that's another thing. Everybody says that the moon's gravity affects our oceans, yet when the astronauts go up there, they say the moon has no gravity, and the astronauts have to wear special boots to keep them down.
Well, it's smaller, so it's got 1/6 the gravity of Earth. Also,
okay,
it has
very little gravity, but how could that be enough to possibly affect our ocean?
Well, it would, because of its size. It causes the tides, and that's a key part of life on Earth, because most people in the world, I think, have like a 3-foot tide. That's like a big tide. Okay, well, my normal tide 2 miles from my house is 11 feet. And if I go further east to Eastport, Maine, it's 25 feet. And if I go further into the Bay of Fundy, the tides are 50 feet. So you guys that are dealing with a 6-inch tide or a 1-foot tide or a 2-foot tide or a 3-foot tide, you can't possibly imagine what goes on, like just even where I live, where it's an 11-foot tide. But there's a lot of life in what's called the intertidal zone between the high tide and the low tide. So when you have a big tide like that, you have a bigger intertidal zone. So that's where the crabs live. That's where periwinkles live, mussels, clams. So there's a lot going on there that's edible, and edible seaweeds. And so if you just had a little tide, your zone might be 5 feet wide, but we can get a zone here, an intertidal zone that's a mile wide. So it's very interesting for people to study the ocean. But basically, I'm just pointing out that a lot of what scientists, you think, well, it's 2012, everybody must know everything by now. Well, they don't know crap. They actually don't know anything. It's sad. And I'll just give you an example. Now, I grow peaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I grew them in Connecticut. Now I live in Maine. And in Maine, I get this leaf curl disease, which is because it's damper and colder, this leaf curl disease attacks the leaves, and the leaves look like they get all crinkled up like a mosaic, and then they die and fall off. And if that happens a couple of years in a row, then the peach tree dies. I never had that happen to me once in Connecticut. And so I thought, well, the Department of Agriculture must know all about it. So I called them up and I said, can you send me something about peach leaf curl disease? So I was thinking, isn't it great, how far science has gone in all directions? And, I get this, there's a 1-page printed thing, both sides, and it's all about leaf curl disease. They got pictures of it. They talk about what areas get affected more. They talk about how bees can spread it, how humans, like a human, can go stop by the side of the road and touch a leaf and get leaf curl disease on their fingers, take a peach off the tree, and then they go down the road and they see another peach tree and they go, I wonder how those peaches are, and they stop and they pick a peach there. Well, they've just spread leaf curl disease to the other trees. So I thought, okay. So I get down to the bottom, and you're going to love this, Royce. At the very bottom, this is the latest information. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Are you holding on to something?
Okay.
This is our government at its best. It says, quote, peach leaf curl disease may be a fungus, or it might be a virus, or it might be a bacteria.
So in other words, they're guessing.
Well, you know, don't you think somebody would have found out by now? I mean, how big is the peach crop around the world? I mean, they supposedly spend all this money on food crops and this and that, so then, and you gotta love it, they say the only thing that works is the so-called Bordeaux mixture, which is a mixture of lime and copper sulfate. Well, hello, copper sulfate's been banned in the United States for agricultural use for about 20 years. So this is the latest information that I'm getting from the Department of Agriculture. So then I go to my agriculture store, and they said, oh, well, we knew it was going to be banned, so we have a big warehouse out back, and we've got a huge supply of the Bordeaux mixture. Would you like to buy some?
That sounds like trying to get a monopoly.
So this is like the whole thing's a joke. It's just everything. It's just don't get me started. But the point is, anyway, so not only do you have to worry about the earthquakes, the volcanoes, and the subsidence, because when the New Madrid Fault goes off, the Mississippi and Ohio river valleys are going to sink downward, and salt water is permanently going to go from up the Mississippi to the Great Lakes. The St. Lawrence Seaway is going to widen, and there's going to be continuous salt water from the North Atlantic to the Great Lakes, down the Mississippi Valley to the Gulf of Mexico. And the whole mountainous, what's left of the mountainous terrain of the East Coast is going to be just like New Zealand is next to Australia. That's like the Adirondacks are going to be like New Zealand. And then all the ice in the world is going to be in the wrong place. So when that melts, the oceans are going to come up 700 feet. So first you have a 600-foot tidal wave. Then in the next 2 years, every tide is 6 inches higher than the tide before it for 2 years until the new sea level is 700 feet above present. But that isn't all. For 3 days after the hour of Poleshift, for 3 days, there's going to be a rain of meteors continuously hitting the earth everywhere. We're talking about pieces of gravel. We're talking about boulders. We're talking about rocks the size of houses. And as you know, if you studied the space program at all, to leave the gravity of the earth, you have to reach a speed of 17,500 miles an hour, which means if you're up in space and you just drop a rock to the earth, when it hits the earth, it will be doing 17,500 miles an hour. So those rocks are going to be red hot. Now, it's not going to matter where a city is all wet and destroyed, but where you have like Colorado or Wyoming, and you've got these huge forests, they're all going to be set on fire. You're going to have cities that have survived the volcanoes, survived the quakes, survived the tidal wave, and now they're going to be hit with rocks. It just, there's no way of saying what areas will be hit with what rocks at what time. So the best thing to do is the minute the rumbling and the earthquakes stop, hopefully you're not next to the ocean, so you didn't get to see the tidal wave. As soon as that's over, you've got to find some place underground, under some steel plates, in a giant cave, whatever you've got. But don't go in there before the quakes, because then it might collapse on you. But after the quakes are over, that might be a good spot. But the thing is the loss of life is just going to be stupefying.
And this is the same event that's really been prophesied about in the Bible, as well as other cultures, because ET or other dimensional beings have been warning humans about this for millennia now. Is that correct?
Absolutely, the time before it was at the time that the Jews were able to leave Egypt and find the Promised Land, and the time before that was Noah, and the time before that was the sinking of Atlantis, and who knows what the heck was going on in the times before that. But the thing is this has been a regular thing, and people, you can talk about global warming all you want, but we have a bridge they built about 25 miles from us, and they made a huge cut into the side of a cliff. And there's a gigantic layer after layer. You can tell that it was laid down as sedimentary rock, that it went deep in the earth and was reheated into metamorphic rock, and then uplifted as a cliff. And in the cliff was a crack, and quartz filled it. So there's this, as you go over the bridge, there's this quartz dagger. It looks like a spear point, and it's got to be at least 100 feet high, probably 25 feet wide at the bottom, and it comes to a point at the top. And you look at the layers of rock, and they're not laying horizontally, they're all vertically. Well, things like that don't happen from some big ocean storms. This has got to be something exactly like the crust coming free from the core, shifting, and then reattaching. And that's what we're going to go through. So, to me, this is the only substantial and reliable evidence of when Poleshift is going to happen, and that clearly, when these top 10 remote viewers looked at these 9 geographic locations around the world, they saw that it had already occurred. Now, the Zetas have said through Nancy Leader that they do know the date of Poleshift, and they would be glad to give it, but only if Nancy is allowed to give a press conference where all the media of the world is present, so that every single person on Earth learns at the same time when Poleshift is, not just the elite.
Yeah, and the fact being that they saw this after, they had no way to really know when it happened exactly, how much time of warning that the people may have had. I mean, I'm pretty sure it didn't all happen just in one single night, but I'm sure that, gradually temperatures started getting warmer, earthquakes got more frequent, and, things of that nature.
Volcanoes are going off. Yeah, so, but the thing is that the Zetas did say that the Earth goes through what they call, which I had never heard of before, but I found out that there are a lot of people that say this is true. We go through magnetic trimesters. In other words, you can divide the year into three different parts: April, August, and December. That's when the magnetic whatever shifts. So those are the trimesters. Each one begins every year in April, then in August, then in December. Those are 4 months apart. Each one is a trimester. The Zetas have said that the Poleshift will occur at the beginning of one of the trimesters. So that means the next time for a Poleshift, we're in June, so it wasn't April of this year. It's unlikely, because we are going to see Planet X separate from the sun in the sky every day for 50 days before Poleshift. So it could be in August, but that doesn't seem likely. It could be in December, which would be consistent with what the Mayan calendar was, and it's more likely, in my opinion, to be next April. That's my opinion, and I don't know. And nobody's saying, but the Zetas have announced through Nancy Leader to the world that if they would schedule a giant press conference with all the media of the world there, that then she would be glad. She said she's no good at keeping secrets. If the Zetas told her, she already probably would have told somebody. But they haven't told her. But they have said that they would tell her, speak through her, if it was a worldwide media event.
So these are extra-dimensional beings.
Right. These are the next dimension up. They're the unselfish Zetas, and they're waiting for the Earth to become fourth dimensional, and then they're going to live on the Earth with us. There's going to be open contact with extraterrestrials from that point on, and no selfish souls will be allowed to be born All the selfish people will die out, and this planet will be unselfish only. And that's our future.
Well, how will they know a baby's selfish before it's born to abort it?
Because it takes 1,000 lifetimes to reach a point where you understand that there is a choice you should be making to orient all your behavior around selfishness or all around unselfishness, or that you haven't reached that point yet. So right now on the Earth, 1/3 of the population has consciously orienting their behavior around service to other. In other words, by that I mean, these people, 35% of the population of the Earth, think of other people first. They have empathy. They can put themselves in the other person's shoes. They realize that the other person's not doing well, they're not doing well, and so they always look out after other people. That's 35%, a little bit more than 1/3 of the population. Then you have 10% of the population who have decided that they are number one and they're the only thing that counts, and they don't care at what cost. They will step on other people and kill them and hurt them so that they get ahead. And that's 10% of the population, and they have made a choice to be selfish.
Now, that only takes care of about 13%. What about the rest?
Okay, so you got 35% are unselfish. You got 10% are selfish. About 55% of the people on Earth don't know that they should be making this choice. And that's because they haven't lived enough lifetimes. Those people are all going to die and be reborn on other third-dimensional planets. And it's already been set up. They're going to go to watery planets, not the Earth, but other watery planets that are on the third dimension. And they are going to be sea creatures. And that sounds silly, but actually an octopuses are very intelligent, can express a lot of social development, and they don't have possessions. So that's the goal, is to put them in a world where they won't allow possessions to interfere with their decisions. And that's part of the problem of what's here on Earth. Because we have hands and fingers, we can make things. Then the things we make become more important than the people, and that's part of the problem with the selfishness. So most people have an unselfish part to them, maybe 40% unselfish, but the rest of the time, 60% of the time, they're selfish. So the point is for you to choose one or the other and orient your behavior completely around that behavior. So the answer is to take these people that still need to make the choice and move them to planets where it's easier for them to make the choice. Let them reincarnate as sea creatures without possessions, and maybe they won't have to live 1,000 lifetimes to figure it out. You look at whales and dolphins, and you see very advanced souls, very advanced animals that have no possessions. Their entire development is social development, getting along, and they all help each other. And
well, it's a well-known fact that dolphins and whales will save a human's life.
Exactly. So they know what's important, and most people don't. And if they do, it's accidental. So there's only about 1/3 of the population. Well, there's 7 billion people. You're talking 2+ billion that are going to be reincarnating on Earth in the fourth dimension. And those will be the ones who will have open contact with extraterrestrials. Some of us who survive the Poleshift will see that the skies are filled with ETs, and they will be here to help rebuild the Earth, and they will not be helping any selfish people at all. They will only help unselfish survival communities where all the leaders are unselfish. And the thing is, if you have a survival community, you don't want to have selfish people in it, because you don't need somebody to sit down and eat enough food for 12 people for a week. So you're going to give them a choice. You're going to say either we're going to shoot you or you can leave and never come back, please. So,
well, that's a heck of a choice to make.
Well, what choice do you have? You know, if you've got a bunch of unselfish people working together, and the funny thing about selfish people is they can't work together because each one of them wants to be number one. So they argue, they fight, Whereas unselfish people can have a meeting and discuss what they want to do, and they can all agree that they're going to work for the same goal, and then they can actually work towards it and accomplish it. You see this every day now, where somebody unselfish comes up with a great idea, and they're trying to implement it, and a selfish person comes around and screws it up totally.
Or tries to take credit for it.
Right. Not only that, but destroys it too. So,
well, we know we got our government's been destroying a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the beauty of it. See, the only reason you need government is because they're selfish people. If you had a planet with no selfish people, you really wouldn't need a government. And if everybody was telepathic, then everyone could come to an agreement easily. They wouldn't need to even travel to have a meeting and write things down on paper. They could just discuss it and agree on it.
So now, do you already have a community of your own started? Are you about to work on one, or?
Oh, no, I don't. Honestly, I don't know where I'd find one or who they would be, but I'm just, I moved to Maine in 1985 and just picked a place to live that it would be relatively safe, which is a mountaintop near the ocean. And so that's my total plan so far. And honestly, the people that I have met personally, a lot of them say, well, we want to come and live with you. And I'm looking at them thinking, wow, you really ought to be in a nursing home or maybe a mental hospital or whatever. But don't expect me to service you, because I'm not devoting the rest of my life to taking care of needy people that are actually very selfish. So if I do have anybody join me, they better be pretty skilled at making log cabins or growing potatoes or whatever it takes, fishing, you name it. But no, the thing is the only person I really convinced is my wife, and I didn't have to convince her because she's in contact with the Zetas and she's had her own experiences. So, but you know yourself when you start, I mean, if you just went to work and you said, well, I was on a saucer last night and met ETs, how long do you think you'd have that job? Or if you go home and you tell your wife, I had a dream of the future and this is exactly what's going to happen, and there were extraterrestrials there and they told me and showed me what's going to happen, so I absolutely know that's the truth. And your spouse is going to say, well, you're nuts. So this is going on all over the world, and that the reference to that is in the Bible, and it says there are 2 in the kitchen and 1 was taken, and there were 2 in the field and 1 was taken. So
actually, my wife would just look at me and nod and go along with me and then think I was crazy without telling me.
Yeah, well, see, you're not alone. Everybody's got this. I mean, I've even got some people in my family that think, well, I couldn't possibly be right. I mean, this is so wild that it has to be wrong. But if you get to know me, you see that what I'm doing is I'm putting these pieces of the puzzle together, and it makes a big picture. And to me, I've figured it out. And I mean, I first read around 1968 Edgar Casey's description of Poleshift. I mean, I read Revelation in the Bible. There are a lot of prophecies all over the place. The Hopi Indians have a prophecy about the red Kachina, which is planet X, and the blue Kachina, which is the dark twin of Earth. So other than the Zetas, the only people to ever mention that there was another planet going around the sun on the opposite side of the Earth, but the same as the Earth, are the Hopi. And except for that, nobody's ever brought it up. Even the Bible.
Didn't Andy Lloyd or Andy Pye or something like that do it with the dark star theory?
I don't know. I'm not familiar. I know that there's a moon, I think, of Saturn that looks like a walnut, and it has a hexagonal shape on it, and people go, well, that's just like the Dark Star from Star Wars.
Yeah, actually, now that you do mention that, Gordon, and this is straying a little bit from the topic, but I feel reasonably sure, since you read probably almost as much as I read, and I don't mean to, belittle the amount you read. I just know I read extraordinary amounts, and I don't mean to be full of myself either, but I feel pretty sure we read pretty close to the same amount. That you've probably been to the Enterprise site, Richard Hoagland's site, and maybe read about the Hephaestus moon article he's got there, and
yeah.
and he's pointed out how it looks like a Death Star.
Yeah, I've read his whole site.
And do you think it's possible that some of the extraterrestrial, instead of the extra-dimensional, beings, but the extraterrestrials, like the Draconis or Lyrians or somebody, could have actually left a Death Star out there close by for future use?
Well, there's a lot of stuff up there. I mean, I started out this show by saying about the ruins on the moon that NASA intentionally aimed the Apollo landers to land in the middle of. So once the rovers find out that they're sitting in these alien ruins, they're going to know that NASA has been lying. So NASA's just hoping to make it right till Poleshift, and then everyone will go in their little hidey hole, and nobody will hold them accountable for lying like rugs to everybody.
Well, nobody will be left to hold them accountable.
Well, that's what they're hoping to get to is to that point. So, but I myself am in touch with extraterrestrials. I mean, I'm not somebody that goes into like a trance or channels or something like that, but a lot of times I just realize things, and I don't know where I get that, but I'm sure, you could look at them as spiritual guides or guardians, or, I don't have a feeling, I'm receiving a transmission, like some people do. But I've just been able to figure out a lot of things. But I know plenty of people who are in contact with these other levels, and which is intelligences on other levels, and some of them I wouldn't give you 2 cents for what they have to say, but there's other of them that are like, it's unbelievable spiritual inspiration to hear these people talk, because they're really, this is like the highest level of information from the Creator just coming from them. And so I probably altogether know at least a dozen people that are in touch with extraterrestrials consciously. Now, probably around the beginning of this decade, not 2010, but around the year 2000, there was probably less than 20,000 real contactees on Earth. But since then, there's over 7 billion fourth-dimensional extraterrestrials have come to Earth. And the reason why is because there's a huge interest. The Earth is about to graduate to another level. And the question is, each one of us has to ask ourselves, are we ready to graduate to that level with the Earth? It's just like the Earth has said, enough of this stupid foolishness on the third dimension. I, myself, being a very super conscious being, want to go to the next level. And so the question is, how many of us on the Earth today are going to be going to that new level with the Earth? And so this has attracted a huge crowd of unselfish extraterrestrials from all over the universe. First of all, because this is going to be a planet for the unselfish only. The selfish are going to be reborn on planets where every single other person is selfish. That's what their fourth dimensional experience is going to be like. So whatever you visualize, whatever your behavior is, that's what you get. So right now you can waver back and forth between being selfish and unselfish. You can protect your family but treat all your business associates as if they were expendable. And that's, a lot of people do that. But the thing is that there's going to be a separation in the next level. So this has already been preordained that it's going to be unselfish people. So what's going to happen is that the spiritual guides and guardians that guide souls that are reincarnating, the selfish they wouldn't function here. And the people that aren't ready to live a life of fourth dimensional life, they can't live here either. It's like when you light a candle at night outside and a moth flies into the flame. It's like the selfish and those that haven't decided just won't be able to function. They're going to fly right into the light and burn up, and they'll be dead. They cannot survive. So for them to take their next step, it's not going to be Earth. But for those who have lived these 1,000 lifetimes, learned what's important, realized that we all come from the same place and we're all going back to the same place, those people are going to be rewarded with a planet where that can be openly expressed and safely flourish without the need for governments, religions, economies, and selfish people. And so there's going to be open contact with extraterrestrials. So you've got over 7 billion extraterrestrials here, and that's why I say this entire project is slanted for success. It's a guaranteed, it's a no-brainer. There's no way it's not going to succeed. So there is going to be a giant separation. So this is not just a disaster, but this is actually a spiritual test. So yes, I say, run for your life. But I also say, if you only live 5 more minutes, make sure that it's spent helping somebody else. Because this is the test. When the chips are down, you get the point. The other people are just as important as you are. So, and that doesn't mean pandering to selfish people. So if somebody comes along and says, I want you to feed me, I want you to give me all your clothing, give me all your stuff. No, you're not going to be stupid. You're not going to let selfish people run all over you. You're going to stand up for what's right, and you're going to say, no, I'm giving you 2 choices. A, I shoot you. B, you leave, and you never come back. So there's going to be tough situations, and no one knows what they're going to have to face. No one knows what people are going to show up on their doorstep and what they're going to say and what their intentions are and what their behavior is going to be. So these are going to be very trying times for everyone. But I will say that all the goodness that anyone ever expresses is well known to everyone else. So it's not lost, and you think, well, nobody's watching. Well, the worst thing a selfish person fears is that other people know how really selfish he is. So in the future, there'll be no such thing as deceit, because instead of using your mind and where all ideas are equal, you're going to use your heart, because your heart is where your soul resides. There's a little blue flame in your heart, and that's where your eternal self is linked to your physical body. And when somebody brings something up, your heart is going to tell you whether that's true or not. So selfish people are just not going to be functional, because the first time they try and tell a lie, everybody else is just going to break out in laughter like, who are you kidding? Give it up. Go away.
Well, you got to understand also, some people, even unselfish ones that are not well researched or studied into ET and other UFO-related matters and ancient aliens, are going to say to you, if you talk to them, how do we know that the aliens that you're getting channeled through aren't tricking you?
Well, you've got to use your heart. I mean, the thing is, if you're dealing with selfish ETs, you're going to feel angry, resentful, used, and possibly violent. Whereas if you're in contact with unselfish extraterrestrials, you're going to feel total love, acceptance. You're going to feel safety. You're going to feel trust. You're going to feel happiness. So trust your heart. If you know how when you meet somebody you've never met before, and within a few minutes you're thinking resentment, possibly anger, or within a few minutes you're thinking, wow, love and acceptance, unconditional love and unconditional acceptance, and peace and healing. Your heart will tell you. So you can use this today. This isn't something you have to wait for the future to use. You can use this today. And actually, you damn well better be using it, because there's a lot of stuff going on. And it is hard to tell when and the thing is that selfish people, and believe me, some of the most selfish people in the universe are humans on the earth. So it's not like we're living in a bubble chamber and then all of a sudden these selfish people come along. Selfish ETs come along. There's plenty of selfishness probably right in everybody's house right now, probably right in their neighborhood, at work. So this isn't something that you've never had an experience with. Just learn to use it. So it's like, if you have a musical instrument and you sound a harmonious sound, it's like hitting a bell, a beautiful bell, and the note carries forever. And wherever it goes, it makes everybody feel good. It makes all the plants, the animals, everybody feels good when they hear that. That's harmony. And when you have a terrible, like say you take some hammers and some pipes and you start banging them and clanging them and there's no harmony to it at all, it's very disconcerting. Those notes fall away fast because they destroy themselves. And the same thing is true of human relations. Good human relations, stuff that's really meaningful and important, lasts forever. So, you've heard of karma, and that, whatever distortions you create have to be balanced. And if you can't balance them now, you're going to have to balance them in your next lifetime. This was well known by 1/3 of the world when Jesus was alive, yet, as far as I know, in all the scripture, it was never mentioned once. So now, Jesus spoke out against adultery, he spoke out against usury, money lending, he spoke out about any number of things. And he never mentioned reincarnation, which at the time he was alive, 1/3 of the world believed in. So I can't believe that he didn't know about it. I have to believe that he chose not to discuss it because that raised all kinds of other issues because not everybody reincarnates. So.
Okay. Well, real quick, I was going to say we've been on here for about an hour and 45 minutes so far, and I really don't recommend going any further tonight. I wanted to let you know, though, I had a little surprise. I was waiting to the last minute to tell you that I have an opening that I wasn't aware of I had in July.
Oh, I'd love to be on in July.
I got to scroll down here in the schedule here and look for it.
I'm going to be on in August, and then I'm on in June with you, and then I could be on in July, and then I could be in August. Because listen, I'm not just sitting around. I'm trying to find stuff to help people. And to my way of thinking, I hope that you're able to get Dr. Courtney Brown on your show, and you are able to ask him, now that you know about Planet X and extraterrestrials and volcanoes and earthquakes, what do you think? Is it possible that you think you discovered it, or could you remote view that?
Yeah. All right, I could probably do that. I was going to say, though, I got 2 openings that I wasn't aware of I had till recently. One of them is the 24th of July, which is a Tuesday. The other one is the 28th. Do you have a preference?
The Tuesday the 24th.
The Tuesday the 24th?
That would be 9 to 11 my time, Eastern time again.
Right, I'm typing this in.
Yeah.
Right now while we're speaking, and I don't usually schedule during shows like this, but I was concerned that I would forget and give it to somebody else later if I didn't do it now.
Well, I'm quite pleased to be on your show, and I think that, there's continually things happening. Now, what the Zetas have said was that they are trying to break the cover up, and they are going to stage events that clearly are just inexplicable by anything that the government has said so far, and will cause the whole subject of Planet X, extraterrestrials, and Poleshift to become public knowledge. So I would be pleased to be on your show on the 24th because things are happening all the time. It's just I've been on for 2 hours and there's another dozen things I could have discussed, but I thought that this was so interesting that a remote viewer, it's not well, it might be psychic, but it's, they've got it as a science now. They call it trained remote viewers, but, that's a whole thing by itself. So it's sort of independent of extraterrestrials and anything else I could say, and yet there it is confirming everything that I've said.
Right, and there's been a lot of research done into this. I've done a lot of research into it myself. So, yeah, I'd be pleased to have you come back July 24th. And you know what? I'm glad you chose that because I looked at that thing again, and I had July 28th taken by Patrick Chenard, and I'm like, oh, he would have been so mad at me if I'd given that away.
Yeah. Exactly.
But, yeah, you're right. When it comes to Planet X and Ancient Aliens, you could go on and on. The books that are out there about it, they're without number almost, you would think. I got a bunch of them myself, And it's a fascinating topic, but, there's a lot of questions that's still not answered about this, and a lot of people aren't aware that when Sitchin was talking about the Anunnaki, what the word actually meant was those who descended from heaven or those who came down. It doesn't mean that the Anunnaki itself is a race like the Draconians or the Lyrians. It means that the Draconians, the Lyrians, the Zetas, all of them are Anunnaki. They all come down from heaven. That means right there that there's not just any one race or one culture or whatever.
Well, the Anunnaki on Nibiru, the Easter Island is the best description of them. They're between 7 and 12 feet tall, and they have red hair, and they're rather unappealing faces, very serious looking. And so, of course, being so unattractive themselves, after they created a race of slaves, they wanted to breed with our women.
Right. Yeah, this is true, and that's mentioned in the Bible too. But for right now, I got a few things I need to tell my listeners about that I don't need to hold you up for, like what tomorrow's show's going to be and friends that I want to send them to.
Then good night, and I look forward to seeing this on YouTube. And again, if you want to go to a website, I don't have one. Go to zetatalk.com and go to poleshift.ning.com, and you will find the latest information. The questions get asked on poleshift.ning.com, and then the answers get posted there as well as moved to the main site, which is zetatalk.com. So, there's no reason why you can't go to both sites. I know a lot of people say, oh, the Zetas, this can't be, that's ridiculous, and Nancy Lieder is ridiculous, but I'm here to tell you I'm not paid by Nancy Lieder to say anything. And I discovered her after I started looking around and saying, who's saying what I'm saying? And I was just amazed. So since 2006, I have been speaking out publicly saying that I know a lot of things, but the details on those sites are incredible. The safe areas, what to avoid, what to look out for, what are absolutely the most dangerous areas, not only because of earth changes, but because of the military, such as Boulder, Colorado, Denver, Colorado, that whole corridor there. So you can look all this stuff up and find out what you should do about where you're at now, and start talking about it with your family. Bring this stuff up, because when finally Planet X goes far enough from the sun that everybody looks up in the sky without any special glasses, without a telescope, without a camera, without a filter, just looks up and sees this huge object with a serpentine tail in the sky, at that point, mark your calendars, because it's 50 days until Poleshift.
All righty. Well, then that at least gives us 50 days to get moved inland.
Exactly. But if you're really smart, you're going to take a trip to inland this weekend, and you're going to meet some people and see if you like the place, and try and do something to set something up so when you do show up, you're not the stranger in town. You already know who the nice people are and where's the best place for you to be with your family. And you can tell your family, look, don't believe a word I'm saying, but if this happens like I say it is, then you want to know where I'll be. That's where I'll be.
All right, that sounds like a winner to me. All right, okay, Gordon, well, I'll be in touch with you, let you know about Courtney as soon as I find out.
Okay, well, that's going to be exciting.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yep, good night. Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye. Okay, everybody. That was Gordon Gianninoto, or Gordon James Gianninoto, who will be returning again July 24th, I believe me and him confirmed. We double-check that again, just to make sure I got that right. Yeah, July 24th at 8 p.m. Also, tomorrow it's going to be Tommy Hawk's Blood, and that'll be my last show until Wednesday. And it's going to be the same time. And it very well could last 2 hours. Tommy's got a lot to say as well. Pardon me. Got something in my throat. Give me just a moment, folks. Sorry about that. That took me by surprise. At any rate, he's got a lot to say as well. He's always a good guest, and I'm sure everybody will enjoy him. And I'll be in touch with him tomorrow night on the show. In the meantime, don't forget to visit World UFO Today website and check out the July 2nd holiday coming up. Don't forget to look on the left-hand side of my menu and click on the Friends. And there's a couple social networks from Ning and, links to them, as well as a forum called Supernatural UFO. There's Alien and UFO Community and United Paranormal International. Drop by, see the folks, check them out, see what you think. I think you'll like them. You might want to get to be a part of them. Don't forget, there's also other radio shows that I recommend. UKPN Radio, Gary Brown. JimHarold.com. Naturally, Jim Harold's the host. The Gralian Report with Micah Hanks. And Ohio Politics, Exopolitics Radio with Mark Snyder. And these are all bannered and got links on them. Take you right to their show. Stop by, check them out, see what you think. Don't forget to check my YouTube channel, Mr. Paranormal. Don't forget to invite your friends to www.paranormalpalace.com. Let them know membership is free. You get signed up, you get into the chat room, you can share, you can ask questions, you can sign up for the newsletter while you're here, and just be a part of the show. And in the meantime, I'm going to let everybody go until tomorrow. Y'all have a good night, and I'll see you then. Thank you very much. Oh, and I want to thank y'all for being a part of my show. I also have to have my listeners as well as my guests. Sorry, I almost forgot to say that. Y'all have a good night.
And no planet can reverse its North Pole without all of them reversing. And that isn't going to happen anytime soon. So what you've got is all of the planets, as seen from above, going around the sun counterclockwise. But in comes Planet X going around the sun clockwise. But the mystery ingredient here that people don't realize, which I mentioned on the last show, is that gravity pushes, it doesn't pull. So when Planet X came face to face with Venus and the Earth, it stopped them both in their orbits around the sun. It stopped moving around the sun. And then the dark twin of Earth, which was on the opposite side of the sun from the Earth, which is another NASA lie they never told, the minute they sent a satellite up from Earth, they must have been able to look behind the sun and go, oh my God, there's a third planet the same size as Earth. So you have three planets. The Earth and the dark twin are exactly the same size, and Venus is like 94% the size of Earth. So you've got three identical sized planets stopped in orbit around the sun. And so it's been just gradually approaching. And the reason why it's approaching is because it wants to escape the solar system. It doesn't like being stopped by Venus, the Earth, and the dark twin of Earth. So, and the dark twin has no atmosphere, no water, no life. It's a black cinder. It's got lots of gold on it that the Anunnaki from Nibiru are still mining. But it does not reflect light very well. And if it does reflect light at all, it's usually a bluish lavender color, sometimes flashes of gold, but depending on how bright the sunlight is. And the dark twin of Earth has been photographed recently from Antarctica, from the Neumayer station, Neumayer, which is the German Antarctic station, has a webcam, and it shows the building on stilts, and it's Neumayer 3 because the first two got buried by ice. So they finally wised up and put these huge stilts in there. So Neumayer 3 is on stilts. They have a radar dome away from the building, and they've got a webcam on it, and you can watch the sun rise and go by the station and then set. And then you can watch the moon rise and then set. And on April 9th, there were three things. First, the sun rose and set. Then the dark twin of Earth rose and set. Then the moon rose and set. And that was a spectacular capture of the dark twin of Earth. So these are things that, if you're not paying attention, you think, and probably deep in your heart, you wish things would continue. You don't want an apocalypse. You're thinking to yourself, well, in a few years I'll be able to retire, my 401k will be fine, and I'll be able to buy that sailboat, or whatever your dream is. You and your wife are going to travel around the world, or who knows what your dreams are, but the thing is, somewhere you'd like things to continue. So saying that there's about to be an apocalypse that's happened every 3,657 years for at least 2 billion years, so this is definitely not the first time, and therefore it's natural. And we've lived and died through this before. Some of us dying and some of us living through it. So, but NASA has known this for 60 years. So how criminal is that? Forget extraterrestrial ruins on the moon. How about knowing about the Earth is going to go through a cataclysm in 2012 or 2013 and not saying a word about it? Well, meanwhile, the elite prepare in all the ways they think are going to work, which actually, so I'm assuming that this show is going to be on YouTube probably by tomorrow or whenever, and I think that's the greatest thing of all, because that's a way that everyone can access the subject without any problem at all, because everybody knows how to go to YouTube, and all you've got to do is look up Planet X, and you're going to be finding this interview.
Right, and you can also go to Mr. Paranormal's channel. You'll find all the interviews. But he's right, Planet X would probably be the shortest route in the YouTube search engine. And Gordon, believe me, I'm going to be posting this show and many shows yet to come, over at YouTube. I think it helps people over there know about me. It helps them know about you. And it helps them get information. So it's really kind of a win-win for everybody. Gordon, I want to appreciate you, because you do, you're a very well-spoken person, and you're very knowledgeable. You've done your research. Whether a person agrees with you or not really wouldn't be relevant. I think we talked about this last time he was on the show, nearly so much as we're dealing with material that is sometimes hard to say who's right and who's wrong, to be sitting there using that as a point of dissension when the important thing is really getting the information out on the table.
Well, this is life-changing stuff, and you can choose not to believe a word I say, and I have no, I'm not selling anything, so I don't have a website, I don't have anything that's for sale, I don't charge for this information. This is just because I want people to know this information to me, and I'm a pretty well-informed person, like you say. I'm pretty well educated, although that didn't seem to do much for me. The things that I consider the most important things I learned in life are things that I learned outside of school. But I am pretty well educated, and when I find something that's exciting, and there are a lot of exciting things out there, and you can, they're pieces to a puzzle, and you put the pieces together, and then all of a sudden there's the picture, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, and I can understand where you're coming from. I myself prefer what I learned outside of school. But you know what? This is some pretty recent news you got going on, if I'm not mistaken, about the Nibiru, Planet X, as some people call it, being near our sun. What can you tell us about that?
Well, see, going back to NASA's lies, which are so many that it's funny. They just this week announced that they don't want anybody going near the Apollo landing sites, which you might think, well, what control do they have over that? Are they kidding? Are they serious? And then you realize that they're particularly worried that nobody go near Apollo 11 and Apollo 17, which, of course, that's like, the story of Brer Rabbit, in the briar patch. It's like, oh, don't go in there? Well, of course, that would be the first place I would look. Just take me right over to Apollo 11 and Apollo 17 and let me see why you don't want me to be there. And the reason why is because they landed all the Apollo flights in the midst of extraterrestrial ruins on the moon intentionally. So that sat there for all these years. Nobody knew. But now there's something like 23 different teams building rovers to go to the moon and roam around the moon. So NASA knows with 23 rovers, somebody is, and I'll tell you, if it was my rover on the moon, I'll tell you, I'd drive it right over to Apollo 11 and Apollo 17.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today, once again, is going to be Gordon James Gianninoto. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about Nibiru and how close its proximity is to our sun, judging by the its moons and it's in the tail of the planet itself, if I understand this correctly. And also, I think he mentioned something to me in Skype earlier, but I lost it when I called him, that he wanted to talk about that we can cover here in just a minute. But before we go too far, I want to remind everybody, you can learn more about Gordon, at Zeta Talk or Zeta Rect. What was that correct website before I mess it up, Gordon?
First of all, good evening to all of you, and I'm a member of the Poleshift.ning.com, and people want to join that. That's the latest information on Poleshift and what the extraterrestrials have to say about it, and what people around the world have photographed themselves and sent in, and the latest on every part of that story. So if that interests you, and I hope that it does, because that's what we're talking about tonight, you can find me on Poleshift.ning.com. It's free to join. There's about 5,300 members. There's many, many times more than that who read it every day for the latest news. And you don't have to be a member, but if you want to send me a message, you have to be a member. And they're very strict with what they don't want you asking personal questions, and they don't want you talking about things that have been mentioned before. And there have been a lot of things mentioned before, because that's where the public gets to ask questions of the Zetas. And Nancy Leader reads the questions and either accepts them or doesn't accept them. If she accepts them, it's because it's a question that's never been asked before in 17 years and 39,000 pages of questions and answers. So that means if you want to ask a question, you better go to the main site, which is zetatalk.com, and do a Google search to see if your question's already been asked and answered. But anyway, that's where you find the information.
You know, I was just adding on the tip of my tongue. I was trying to think of zetatalk.com, and for some reason I had a brain freeze. But I do appreciate you helping me out with that, Gordon. And I want to thank you for returning to my show tonight, because I know you got so much to cover, you can't really cover it in any one given particular show. Also, before we go too far into this, I'd like to remind everybody that the call-in number is 832-632-7904. For those of you listening at iTunes, Shoutcast, or somewhere else, I'd love to have you join us over here at www.paranormalpalace.com. I appreciate all my listeners everywhere, but you come over here, we can all get together in the chat room and talk while the show's going live, and I'd love to have a little community going over here. So, Gordon, what was that other topic that I had a brain freeze on that you mentioned in the instant message?
The remote viewing that
that one.
2010. But I just want to say, Royce, I really enjoy being on your show. I find that you're extremely well informed. You're very articulate. You keep right up with me, and I think you're doing a great public service. And the best thing of all is the way you started putting your shows on YouTube, because those are the ones they don't want me to look at. And they're going to find that they landed in the middle of alien ruins, which means since 1970, NASA has known that there are extraterrestrials. And that's 42 years of lies. So right there, it's over for NASA. So NASA's lying just about everything. And they would have you believe that they're still looking for Planet X. And they've known for 60 years that Planet X was approaching from the direction of Orion, which is the constellation where you have the Archer. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, you have the constellation of Pleiades. Then you've got Orion. And then to the lower left, you've got this star that spins around really fast and emits different colors that people always mistake for a UFO, called Sirius. So right there where the three stars in the belt are, that's where Planet X was coming in. So they sent up an infrared satellite to look for it in 1983, and they found it, and they announced it in all the national newspapers in December 1983, Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA together jointly announced they have found Planet X. And then the next day they go, whoops, we're still looking for it. No, we thought we found it, but we were wrong. We're still looking. Don't worry. You can go back to sleep. And I'm sure it was because that night people said, well, if you found it and it's coming in, what does that mean? So, of course, after they thought about it, they realized it was better for them to say, well, we didn't find it. We're still looking for it. So that was really the beginning of the lie. Then it entered our solar system and the outer reaches in 1999, and then it came around from behind the sun in the year 2003 in December, and it's been in between the sun and the earth since 2003. Now, there's 93 million miles between the earth and the sun, and if you draw a straight line from the center of the earth to the center of the sun, that's 93 million miles. But below that line, so as you look at the sun, as seen from the earth, below the sun, but close to the earth, only 30 million miles away, is Nibiru, or, as it's known today, Planet X. And that's where it is. And it's pointing, it's laying on its side, so its North Pole is pointed at the earth like a flashlight, and it's got a twin-stranded tail that is got hundreds of moons, trillions of boulders and rocks, untold amounts of gravel, iron ore dust, and oily hydrocarbons. So that tail, when it was closer to the sun and it was approaching us from next to the sun, it looked like a bird wheeling in the sky because each strand of the tail looked like a wing. And that actually is the ancient symbol for the destroyer planet.
Yeah, the winged sun globe.
It's called the winged globe. And that the symbol, you see that pilots have little globes with wings on them. That's like, oh, you earned your pilot's wings. You know, it's the same symbol.
Right. You know, I've read that before too. So basically, from what you're describing, shouldn't anybody with a telescope be able to look up there and see the planet somewhere in its orbit?
No, it's not in an orbit. It's stopped, and the Earth is stopped. And the planets, if you could reach up and pull all the solar system down and slap it down on the table in front of you, it would look like a giant pancake, like a fried egg with the sun at the center. And all the planets and the sun all have their north poles pointing upward. I'm here to tell you none of them are going to work. If they want to survive, they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and work in the garden just like you and me. Because there's not going to be any food delivery. Certainly you're not going to be able to spend any money or any gold or diamonds or jewels or any other valuables on anything. You're going to have to produce something to trade, and somebody with some food or something that you want is going to have to be producing that and make a deal with you to trade for it. So this is going to be a barter economy very soon.
Yeah, I know some people tried to bring back bartering a few years ago when I was working, but one of the things that caught my attention that you were saying was about 3 planets stopped orbiting. How does a planet stop orbiting, and what effect does that have on the planets around it, and doesn't it put it in the path of a planet that's still orbiting?
No. See, that's what's so interesting about, I mentioned this before, that I figured this out logically on my own, without a $5 million laboratory, without top scientists working for me, and it just made absolute sense. And that is, you have the electromagnetic spectrum. You've got heat, sound, light, electricity, radio waves, and they all go out and don't come back. You can reflect them back, but they go out and they don't come back. Then you've got magnetism, which some people say is bipolar, and because it goes out the North Pole and then the lines of magnetic force get sucked back in the South Pole. But really, the only engine in that is at the North Pole where the magnetic field gets shot out. So I'm going to put that in the category of it goes out and it doesn't come back. So you don't have people talking anti-sound, anti-heat. You don't hear people talking about anti-light, anti-radio, but you do hear about anti-magnetic. So, and by that they're referring to something that's not iron, therefore magnetism doesn't work on it. But you know, we've seen experiments where they've created these incredible fields, and they floated a frog, which certainly was a living frog. It wasn't an iron frog. It was a living frog. They floated it in the air above this huge magnetic field. So it's really a question of how much magnetic field you have as to whether something is magnetic or not. But they say anti-magnetic, they mean like aluminum. But that isn't really the same as saying that there's, you know, as anti-light, and then you say anti-magnetic. They're not really talking about the same anti-thing. So then you get down to the end of the spectrum, and all of a sudden you're down at the other end of the electromagnetic spectrum. You have gravity, and we've been told before we were born, for the last 400, 500 years, we have been told that gravity pulls. But I called the foremost gravity researcher in the world in 1989, and I had a 4-hour conversation with Dr. Ephraim Fishbach at Purdue University. And I asked him flat out, is there any proof that gravity pulls? Because I'm convinced it pushes. And he goes, you may very well be right. There is not a single experiment in the history of the world that proves whether gravity pushes or pulls. He goes, if you would invent an experiment that proves one way or the other, you would probably be one of the most famous scientists in the last 1,000 years and maybe forever. So,
well, you know, Gordon, if you're correct, and I have reason to believe you are, well, at least it would make sense to me.